Calorie Jones here. Today I want to bring you the Tier 1 exotic guide for the Hawk. This guide's going to be a little bit different because I'm going to talk about the Rocket Hawk as well as the Light Missile Hawk. Both versions are actually quite competitive with each other when you're looking at average runtime, with the Light Missile setup being about 30 to 40 seconds slower compared to the Rocket version. But the Light Missile version is a lot easier to optimize, so really I would make the decision on which to fly based on your own personal preferences. That 30 to 40 second difference in runtime for the Light Missile version is only going to translate to maybe one less run an hour for Tier 1, so on average you're talking maybe 5 million ISK less per hour. Moving over to the fits, we're first going to talk about the Tier 1 exotic MWD Rocket Hawk. This setup is one of the peak performers for these Tier 1 solo assault frig blitz setups. This will consistently average under 5 minutes per run, and it's competitive with the Pulse Retribution, but it's a little bit easier to hit that min-max in the Rocket Hawk because you don't have to worry with tracking. This setup will have slightly higher APM compared to the Light Missile version because of the faster cycle time of rockets, and you're generally going to be reloading a couple more times per run. Ultimately though, it's still very manageable and is quite easy compared to something like the Retribution. There are honestly a lot of ways to fit this setup. What you see on screen is what I ran for the clips for this guide, but my original Blitz Rocket Hawk version is still very viable. It swaps the web here for another cap mod, and that lets you run a little bit cheaper fit because we're not using the fleet small batteries. And then it runs a light neutron blaster, which gives you roughly 50 more DPS on the battleship spawns. And if you don't know, for Tier 1, a lot of the battleship spawns are what really drag down your average runtime. But looking at the fit on screen, we have two Ballistic Control System 2s and the lows. That's just for DPS. We're going to run the Microwarpdrive. You really don't want to run an AB plus rockets outside of Dark because you just spend too much time not doing any damage. We have a small Tech 2 shield booster for tank. You really don't need much tank in Tier 1 once you learn where the threats are. We have these two fleet small cap batteries. We're running the nicer batteries because we want to be just cap stable. We're barely cap stable in this. And it's still relatively cheap. I mean, it's less than a 70 mil fit overall, but it lets you perma run things without having to put much thought into it. This web here is actually a flex slot, so if you want to go with the much cheaper cap batteries, you can put a cap recharger here and it won't matter all that much. Where this web will help is it helps with applied damage on something like a Damavik or a Tesla when it's in its orbit speed, so it doesn't have the Sig Balloon bonus that a lot of the Abyss rats have. And then the last thing with this web is you can use it to stiff arm Tesseras if you get a little bit too close and you're trying to maintain your 10 to 11 kilometer orbit to kill the Tesseras with Rage. And then for the high slots, just rocket launchers. Again, you're going to use Scourge Rage for most spawns. You can swap to Javelin for Tesseras and Kite at max Javelin range, but honestly, I just run Rage, orbit Tesseras at 11 km, and just take the risk of, eating a couple wrecking shots in a row. For the rig slots, you have the Bay Loader, which is just for DPS, and then the EM rig, which is just to help with your tank. Only other thing to cover here is, depending on how you spend CPU in your mid slots, you might have enough room for a gun in your high slot, and you'll try to get a blaster on there for max DPS, and if not a blaster, do an autocannon. Again, you're not going to use that damage on most spawns, but versus things like Overmines and Deep Watchers, it can help with your clear time. Moving over to the Light Missile version, same deal with the low slots. You can use Ballistic Control Systems to get DPS. You're limited by CPU on the setup, so we have one Meta Crosslink BCS here, but if you decide to somehow get CPU back elsewhere on the fit, you could always make this Tech 2, which is kind of nice because these Meta BCSs are actually relatively expensive. For the mid slots, we're going to run the Afterburner. You can run a Microwarpdrive with light missiles, again, once you figure out how to spend your CPU. And it will be slightly faster on average. I would say maybe 10 to 15 seconds at most faster runtime with an MWD versus the Afterburner. But you really don't gain a lot with that Microwarpdrive because for the most part, you're going to spend most rooms within range of the enemies with the light missiles. And a lot of it is just fly to the cache and fly to the gate while you're killing, unless there's a serious threat in the room that makes you fly differently. But yeah, for the mid slots, we got the Afterburner, 2 cap batteries. We don't need nearly as much cap because we're not running the Microwarpdrive. Again, flex slot with this thermal shield amplifier. This could be a web. It will help with some of your application because Fury missiles do not apply perfectly against all enemies in the Abyss once they're in their orbit. It could be a web, could be an amp, could be more capped. It's just really up to what the pilot wants. I'm running the thermal shield amp here to help with certain spawns. And then again, Tech 2 small shield booster. Really don't need a lot of tank at all for tier 1, especially since we have the ability to kite a lot of the higher DPS spawns. For the high slots, just the light missile launcher 2s. You're going to use Scourge, Fury, light missiles for pretty much every enemy in tier 1. I don't even bring any other missile type. You could make an argument for faction, but I mean, faction missiles are a slight DPS boost against something like a Damavik, but you are spending more. I personally am not going to worry with it. Again, if somehow you have CPU left over, you could put a gun in this extra high slot, similar to the rocket setup, but with the light missiles, it's actually a lot harder to get all this on the ship. And then for the rigs, we're going to run a Warhead Califaction Catalyst. This is just for damage. You could run a Bayloader, which I think is technically 1 DPS more damage, but it ultimately does not matter. I prefer just to have a slightly higher volley damage. And then again, EM Shield Rig for tank. That's it for the fits. Pretty straightforward. Again, ultimately pick based on what you prefer to fly. The light missile setup was actually a lot closer in average runtime than I originally assessed it would be compared to rockets, but the lower APM of the light missile setup was just not for me. So I personally prefer the rocket setup, but ultimately it's not going to make a huge difference at the end of the day. The other thing is, if you want to fly dark, you can take the light missile AB version and put it right in dark without making any change. And then for the rocket setup, you'd want to put an AB on there and then decide how to spend your CPU in that extra mid slot. Overall, dark in the Hawk will be a little bit less ISK per hour for rockets or light missile because you can't take advantage of the exotic weather bonus. That said, dark is honestly probably the easiest weather to learn tier 1 in, especially with an Afterburner. So if your goal is not necessarily maxing ISK per hour right now, I would definitely consider running an AB setup in dark, just because it's a little bit more forgiving with the reduced turret ranges on enemies. Moving into the room by room guide, first we're going to start with the Rocket Hawk versus a room 1 Devoted Knight. For those of you that don't know, in room 2 and 3, you can actually use what's known as the invuln period to coast into these enemy ranges. With something like the MWD, you're going to start this fight on top of the Devoted Knight, but room 1 Devoted Knight is about as bad as it's going to get. We're just going to slowly spiral in here. I say slowly, but you're moving at MWD speed, so even if you take some bad hits here on the initial approach, you're not going to be operating at those ranges long enough for it to kill you. So we're going to get close. We're going to set up a 500 meter orbit. You can see I'm not really touching my tank. You could run the tank here a little bit if you were worried that you dipped a little bit low, but honestly here, just make sure your cap's going to your Microwarpdrive, and once you're in this 500 meter orbit, the Knight is not going to hit you and your cap is not going to be an issue. Going back to the invuln period, for room 2 and 3 in the Abyss, you can actually start each room without the enemies taking any action as long as you don't take an aggressive action yourself. So with something like a Microwarpdrive, you can coast to pretty much all the way to the gate when you load into these rooms because your ship is already flying towards the gate. And you just use that period to start at a range that is better suited for your fit. Moving over to the light missile version, you're going to see me go in. I'm going to do a close 500 meter orbit against the Knight. We can do a wider orbit since we have a longer range on the light missiles, but I maintain that once you learn how to correctly spiral in on things like the Knight, it is ultimately safer because, we're not going to get capped out. And, if you hit a speed cloud at a 500 meter orbit, you're more likely to stay, towards the gate because that's where you're taking the fight. Whereas if you're doing something like a 20 kilometer orbit on a Knight, it's hard to say where that Knight has pushed you in the arena and you hit a speed cloud. I mean, if you're paying attention, you're probably not going to die to that, but it does open up some areas where you might lose a ship due to random placement of a cloud. You can see that we do take some hits on the way in as we tackle this knight, but it's ultimately, a knight's not going to kill you as long as you're paying attention. If you find that you're being a little bit too aggressive on the approach, you can always, fly a little bit more passively to take less hits, but I personally like to just close the gap, get in this orbit, and then just repair the tank as necessary once I'm in that orbit. But what I'm going to do here for the guide is I'm going to show you how it looks with a 20 kilometer orbit. So once you're at 20 kilometers on the knight, orbiting at an AB speed, you're outside of newt range, you're outside of web range. He's not going to hit you all that much, but what you will see here is, one, you're being pushed around the arena, so it's a little bit less efficient on time, and he can wreck you like he just did right there. He's unlikely to wreck you multiple times in a row. It could happen. He's hitting, your lower EM resist here, so the follow-up shot wouldn't look so bad, but this is just something where, you're significantly mitigating the incoming DPS, but there is still a chance to take damage here. So again, I personally prefer to just learn how to spiral in and fight this knight at 500 meters, because you don't really gain much by being this far out. And again, I'm going to have to go over and grab that cache after I've killed this knight, and I think I'm going to do it even a little bit earlier here. So this is a risk, but I know he's not going to kill me. So, how you fly this is going to be up to you. I'm always going to be aggressive, especially in these low tier cheap setups, but I just want to show you that it is doable to fight him outside of web and newt range. Moving on, let's talk about how to fight Tesseras with the Rocket Hawk. So I'm going to set up a 10 to 11 kilometer orbit versus the Tesseras, and I'm going to fire Scourge Rage at them. You could use Javelin and go to your max Javelin range if you want less risk here, but I can tell you I have never lost a Rocket Hawk to a Tessera. You can see even here I'm fighting a Spark Grip. It's going to be firing into my lowest possible resist. This is a worst case scenario. And what the risk actually is here is if you eat a wrecking shot and then a follow-up, so potentially even double wrecking, it could happen, and over a long enough grind fest it will happen, but by then you will have definitely paid off your ship. If you do take a bad hit here, what I would do is just fly away, use your Microwarpdrive speeds to just quickly pull range, and the Tessera's, very unlikely to hit you again. But you can see here that even at this close orbit, we're okay. Let's take a look at how we would fight this same Tessera with the light missile setup. So really it's the same thing, just a lot slower, and we're going to do it at a farther range. I can't remember if I actually set up a manual, set an orbit value in this clip. I might just be kind of double clicking around the Tessera to try to maintain position. And then the other thing I want to showcase in this clip is we have a deviant tower in between us and this Tessera. So with light missiles, one thing you have to deal with is these towers, especially short range towers, will delete your missiles in flight. And if I had to fight this enemy up close, say it's an Overmind and I can't really, or I don't want to have it follow me around, you're going to have to get within about 7 kilometers to kill that enemy so that your missiles aren't dying, but in the time that it takes to reach that enemy. But it's a Tessera, so we don't want to fight it within 7 kilometers. So I'm just going to fly away from this tower. I'm going to let it follow me. And then once I see that, I'm far enough away, I'm going to start firing. You can see that my missiles are still within range of that tower by the time it hits that Tessera, but they are landing. And yeah, I think I set a 21 kilometer orbit here. Yeah. So this is where a Microwarpdrive on the Light Missile Hawk will save you a little bit of time, because once we kill this Tessera, I'm going to have to go back to the cache and then back to the gate. And then you can see, with this Tessera speed, he's actually pushing me around the room, so it's just going to push me further and further away. You can use this opportunity to learn how to manually pilot, so, you're kind of deciding where to let the Tessera push you to, a little bit more than just letting the orbit move you around. And you can see that once I get further away from this tower, I'm going to double click probably towards the gate. Yeah, to just kind of cut down on some of this downtime that I'm going to have after killing this Tessera. Ultimately though, even doing this, your average is still competitive, and this is the easier way to do it. While we're on the topic of deviant towers, I'm going to show you a clip of basically a worst case scenario for your average runtime in the Light Missile Hawk. So I am at a point blank orbit on the Overmind. Even, light missiles or rockets, you're always going to point blank orbit these Overminds because there's no reason not to. And if you are running a gun on your setup, this is where you would actually use your gun. But you can see here that this Overmind is sitting on top of a Deviant tower, which is within range of the gate. So if you did not want to do this, you would have to let this Overmind slowly boat towards you to get out of range of this tower. But, if we go beyond about 7 kilometers here, none of our missiles are going to land. This is actually the reason why I don't like recommending light missiles in general to newer pilots, but especially rapid light missile caracals. I know a lot of people, they question why we don't release or really promote rapid light missile caracals in Abyssal Lurkers, but right here is where you're going to see a lot of newer pilots, lose a ship to the timer and not really understand what's going on. Next room, I'm going to show a Cynabal as a light missile AB Hawk, and this is a room where, if you want to try to kite everything you can, but angel rooms are not going to give you the option. But we're going to do this very similarly to the Knight. We're just going to go into a close 500 meter orbit, and you're going to kill it with Fury lights from that distance. What I would do here, we have a Fury in the spawn, which is nuding us. I think it's a Fury, yeah. Ultimately, not a big deal. If it was an Echo, I would probably kill the Echo while we approach the Cynabal, just because it's going to be another web on our ship, which you're an AB Hawk, you're still going to be okay under dual webs, especially against a single Cynabal, but I mean the Echo is going to vaporize by the time you actually get within range of that Cynabal. Next room, we're going to talk the triple devoted hunter spawn. This is actually one of the highest DPS spawns you're really going to face in tier 1 as a frigate because, they can actually apply damage to you. The light missile version is going to be very easy. We're just going to fly away at the start. I personally would not, set any kind of orbit value here. I would learn how to manually pilot. And we're just going to kite around. I'm going to fly away from this cache as we kill 1 to 2 hunters. And then you can see once, we're down to 1 hunter or the second hunter is about to die, I'm going to start moving towards the cache because, on their own, they're not going to kill a hawk. And then while we're at it here, you can see that I have my light missile launchers in 2 groups. I do that because I want to limit overkill on a lot of these targets. Something like a hunter, I'm still going to focus fire, but if you have a spawn that's like rogue drone frigates, I put 2 launchers on each frigate just to minimize overkill, so we're not wasting a lot of time. You can see here, last hunter, I'm going to start moving towards the gate. Again, this is another area where having the Microwarpdrive will save you a little bit of time, but, light missile plus AB, it's harder to get an easier setup for these tier 1 fits. And then something you can see here, even with the Afterburner setup, you can be mindful of your positioning. And once this hunter dies, I'm going to be about 10 kilometers off the gate, so I'm only going to burn maybe another 15 seconds here. It's something where, you can have the Microwarpdrive, but it's not as far ahead as you might think. And now you're going to see me do the same spawn with a Rocket Hawk. I know for a lot of pilots, the triple hunter spawn is the intimidating spawn to fight as a brawling setup because you are taking so much damage, whereas pretty much every other spawn you don't take really any damage at all. We're going to use the full invuln period here. You're going to see we're going to start on top of these hunters, and this first hunter is going to be dead by the time that the room really reacts. What you can do here, similar to the ret, is once you kill this first hunter, if you're worried about your tank, just fly away. You're fast enough that you will pull range, and you can catch him on tank before going back in. But especially with using the invuln period here, I overheat on the first hunter, it dies, and then, really once that first hunter is dead, there's not really much threat in the room. But there's a lot of room for overheat here. I would overheat your rocket launchers, and I would overheat your tank, especially if it's the first room of the run where you can't take advantage of the invuln period. And it's nice. If it's the first room, then you have no heat damage going in. And the last room I want to cover in this guide is the Rogue Drone Frigate room, but I'm only going to cover it as a Rocket Hawk. So the light missile setup, this is where, people talk about light missiles are so far ahead because you don't have downtime when firing against enemies, and that is true. And the Rogue Drone Frigate room is the best room for that on light missiles, but really with the Rocket Hawk, you're not that far behind because you're going to get to the cache. It's going to take you a few seconds. and you're going to be able to cycle through these drone frigates a lot faster than the light missile setup will, just because of the difference in the volley time and potential overkill on the rogue drone frigates. So what I do here, again, this is a small optimization. I microwarpdrive to the cache, loot, and then just no microwarpdrive to the gate, and by the time you hit the gate, everything's going to be dead. As always against these rogue drone frigates, they are a short-range blender, so if you feel like you're falling behind on tank, then you just fly away, or just any movement at all, and they're not going to maintain enough optimal range on you to do serious damage. So yeah, that's all the rooms that I want to cover for this guide. As always, if there's a room that you find yourself having a lot of trouble with, you can always hit me up in Abyssal Lurkers and ask for a specific clip for it, or I'm always happy to talk through how these spawns work. I've said it earlier in the video, but I want to reinforce again, on the Rocket Hawk, you can get away with using only Scourge Rage rockets in exotic. And then for the light missile version, you would only use Scourge Fury light missiles. There are some instances where, it might make sense to swap off ammo types, but you really don't need to, and you're going to be, 95% effective in pretty much every spawn. The one difference or caveat I would say is if you want less risk against Tesseros as the Rocket Hawk, you will use Javelin. Do not use Javelin against something like Devoted Hunters though, because you're still going to be very much within their effective DPS range, and you're significantly hurting your own DPS, whereas the light missile version can just fly far enough away from the Devoted Hunters that, they're going to apply some damage, but it's not going to be lethal damage. So yeah, that's our Abyssal Lurkers T1 Exotic Hawk guide. If you like this format, let me know in the comments below. I try not to write too many scripts because I find that I burn too much time, getting a script perfect versus, if I just sit here and talk about what I know about, the Abyss and being an admin at Abyssal Lurkers, it's a little bit more natural. If you have a preference one way or the other, definitely let me know. As always, you can hit me up within Abyssal Lurkers in Discord and game. You can hit me up in comments here. I love talking about the Abyss, love helping new pilots. And even if you're not a super new pilot to the game, if you just want to branch into this type of content and you want to learn more, just hit me up. I typically don't promote my YouTube content similar to other YouTubers because, I do this for fun as much as it is a resource and helpful to Abyssal Lurkers. But one thing that does help me out is if you have still not used the recruitment bonus link, you're welcome to use mine, because I can use the boosters that you guys give me to help cover some of the costs for these guides. But as always, if you have an alt or friends, I would use the referral link within that group so you guys can share the rewards. But as always, thanks for watching and take care.